Good evening, everyone. Shall we just pray together before we come to God's word? Our loving Father, through all the changing scenes of life, in trouble and in joy, your praises are still in our mouths because you are the eternal God, unchanging, faithful. And we thank you for that faithful Queen who served you and now finds her rest in you. Lord, open your word to us in Jesus. Amen. We're going to be carrying on from looking at Mark's Gospel. And this evening we've come to Mark's Gospel, chapter 2, and verses 13 to 17. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus said. And Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, in the last few days, we've seen many interviews with ordinary people leaving flowers, people just standing outside one of the many palaces in Scotland, in England. And there's been a theme running through it, I think. And one of those themes that's come very clearly to me is the people were struck by Queen Elizabeth's ability to make a person spoken to feel special. As if people have used the phrase, as if they were the center of her attention. And you see them as they do those walkabouts. Everybody's pushing forward, pushing their flowers forward, pushing theirs. And yet she managed to focus on the person in front. And I've heard so many people say that when they went to an occasion and she spoke to them, she had the ability to just focus on that person. So you felt you had the full attention of the monarch, which is remarkable. And so, as I've been going through this passage and going over it, what leapt out for me was that simple statement: he, Jesus, saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. So let's just look at this. Jesus saw Levi. He saw him. It says Jesus went out again beside the lake. Now, we've just been hearing immediately before that, you remember Sarah told us last week about Jesus being crowded into a house and people crowding round him and the man being let by his friends through the roof. And you just wonder, I wondered to myself, did Jesus need a bit of space and a bit of quiet and a bit of open air? And he goes out by the lake. But you know, if as the last verses showed us, they said, "We have never seen anything like this," you can't be surprised that people followed him, because they must have been wondering, what comes next? What comes next with this man? And so he's surrounded, crowded around by people following him. And you know, one of the things that always strikes my heart about Jesus is, my reaction would be, "Oh, just give me a bit of peace for a while." And Jesus began to teach them. Always open, always ready, always available to the people around him. And as he's walking along, and just imagine this, he's walking along, he's talking to people, he's surrounded by people crowding in on him. And this is remarkable because he sees Levi. He sees him. You'd think he'd got plenty to distract him, but he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. You know, when you read those words, other things come into your mind if we know the Bible. And that is Jesus seeing tax collectors when nobody else sees them. You remember Zacchaeus up a tree? And Jesus walking along, and he sees him. He notices him. The Son of God we're talking about, the King of Kings, the monarch, even if they only saw him as a remarkable rabbi at that time and they didn't really understand who he was, it was still an amazing thing for a rabbi. Do you remember another little story Jesus told about somebody who was set upon by thieves and robbed and injured, and members of the establishment made sure that they didn't come in contact with a dead body, if that's what it was. They didn't go to look closer. That would make them unclean. They steered away. They crossed over to the other side. They kept their distance because a rabbi had to be careful who he was seen with. But not this rabbi. Not this rabbi. And I know you've all heard how tax collectors were hated. You know, they paid up front, they paid a big sum of money, they got the rights to collect all the taxes in an area, but that immediately put them in collusion with the governing powers, with the Romans. They were seen as traitors. That was the very first thing, seen as traitors. And when they took their collection, of course, they didn't only get back the sum that they'd paid, they took a bit extra. And so they were seen as exploiters of their own people. How much a traitor could you be to exploit your own? And then as well as that, their daily work brought them in contact with Gentiles. So they were excluded from synagogue worship. They were unclean. So these men had no place in the religious establishment, in the community life. Levi was excluded. If a tax collector came to your house, your house would be unclean. He'd knocked at your door. He'd made your house unclean until the end of that day. But Jesus doesn't avert his eyes. Jesus doesn't go by on the other side of the road. Jesus looks straight at Levi. And there's no excuse, no misunderstanding. Nobody can make excuses for Jesus and say, well, he just met this man. He didn't know who he was. He was sitting there at his tax collector's booth. And Jesus goes to him where he is. Can you imagine the shock of those people who are around? This is a rabbi. This is somebody who separates himself. And he goes to this man in the very situation which makes him disliked and despised. You can imagine some of those people around saying, what is it with this Jesus and tax collectors? What has he got for tax collectors? Disreputable people. Why doesn't he associate with good people, upstanding, upright people? What does he say? Does he say, look, Levi, you need a good talking to. Change your way of life. This has got to stop. Does he draw him up in front of all those people? Jesus says to him simply, follow me. Follow me. Levi, there's one life here, and there's another life possible. Follow me. It's about a personal relationship. The heart of our faith is not a series of creeds, but it's a relationship with Jesus Christ. With God through Jesus. This is personal. No conditions, just those words, follow me. I don't think we can take it in properly. You know, this man comes along. What is it? What is it that gives Levi, Matthew as we know him, the strength to get up and to go? Believing in means following, becoming a disciple. It's part of what Jesus says when he says, abide in me, stay with me, stay with me. And you know, if you read about disciples at this stage, when a disciple came to follow a rabbi, normally he had to be the best in his school. He had to be the cream of the cream. And then he might be interviewed, and then he might be accepted to follow a rabbi. And it's quite comical when you read about disciples of rabbis. They followed so closely. They would almost catch the dust of the feet. They were determined not to miss anything because they wanted to be like their rabbi. That was what being a disciple was. So when Jesus says, follow me, it's a whole life, a new life that he's offering Levi. And other people, other rabbis, looked for the best of the best, put them through the trials, and Jesus takes what everybody considers the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low. And so you get the Pharisees' immediate disapproval. It's like the occasion when they saw Jesus' feet being washed by a woman of ill repute. If he was religious, if he knew who he was dealing with, no respectable rabbi would. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? Jesus wasn't religious enough for them. Jesus wasn't judgmental enough for them. Jesus wasn't separatist enough for them. You remember the Aramaic word from which Pharisee comes means separated. Separated. Now, holy also means separated, but separated for God, for God's purposes. But these people were cut off for fear of contamination. You know, this man is making the most incredible life change. But his reaction is not terror, am I doing the right thing? I'm leading a comfortable life. His reaction, and we read this in Luke, is pure joy. He has a party for his friends. He feels as if something has changed and lifted in his life. Who do you think his friends would be? I think they were all the other people who are excluded, all the other people who didn't find a welcome, all the other people that rabbis wouldn't associate with, all the other people who wouldn't be welcome in the assembly. A real mixed bunch. Other people who expected to be disapproved of. Philip Yancey, in his book Amazing Grace, tells of a young prostitute who comes to him in a real state, and he knows where she's near, and he says to her, well, look, there's a church near there, go to the pastor there, and, find a place within there. And she says to him, why would I go there to be made to feel worse than I already am? And so many people have that view of the church, don't they? Not that we are sinners and we bring other sinners in, but that we are the respectable people who keep apart from others. I wonder at this stage what the disciples were thinking. Were they a bit uneasy? You know, their rabbi might be letting himself down at times. He talked to women, and not only women, but Samaritan women, and he talked to them seriously. He encouraged children to come. Children, not grown-ups who would listen to him as a teacher. People that other people didn't have time for, Jesus had time for. And so the Pharisees challenged the disciples. And I think it's interesting that they challenged the disciples and not Jesus. And we don't know what the disciples' response was. But they said, look at him. What's he doing? What kind of rabbi is he? He spends his time with all these unclean people, making himself unclean. Sinner here is a technical term for people who are outside the law, lawbreakers. And Jesus doesn't only not avoid them, he sits down and he eats with them. Do you remember the lovely picture in Revelation where Jesus says, you know, here I am, and I stand and I knock, and I want to come in and I want to eat with you and have fellowship with you. That's the Lord. He eats with them intimately, closely. And Jesus doesn't need the disciples to answer for him because he answers them directly. He knows. And he says to them, a doctor's place is with sick people. That's where a doctor should be. And immediately, you know, I don't know what their reaction was. A doctor should be with sick people. They spent all their time with pure people, good people, respectable people. And Jesus gives his attention. Jesus saw Levi. You don't go to a doctor if you feel well. Jesus is the healer. That's what salvation translates as, healer. Salvation, savior of souls. And the response of Levi and his friends show that they know that they knew they needed something, someone. They needed a doctor, and they knew it. They needed a change of life, and they knew it. They knew themselves in need of help. Whereas the Pharisees, in their superiority, in their self-righteousness, in their complacency, don't feel they need a doctor. They know themselves to be well. Do you remember Jesus tells us of a prayer? 2 people praying, another tax collector, a Pharisee. Lord, I thank you that I am not like other people and certainly not like this man. No need of a doctor. So sure of his own rightness. Do you remember that other occasion when Jesus heals the man born blind? And the Pharisees can't acknowledge the miracle that they've seen, but they're just arguing over petty details of the law. And Jesus says to them then, do you know what your problem is? You think you can see. You think you can see. So I can't help you. You claim to see, he says, and therefore your guilt remains. If they knew they were blind, he could help them. But they don't. They miss the miracle in their blindness. I'm sure this is familiar to all of you, this passage. But do you know what effect it's had on me this week? The first one is a chill of fear. And I tell you why it produced a chill in me. Who am I most like in this? I might be like the disciples, perhaps, wishing that their teacher was a bit more respectable, and yet still following. That they could make Jesus more acceptable to the people around them. God forbid, but I might be like a Pharisee. A pillar of religion, establishment figure, wanting to keep ourselves pure, above all the riffraff, stay in our holy huddle, associate only with each other. And one of the dangers of being part of a church community is exactly that, isn't it? That we're so involved in keeping our community going that we don't have time. We don't meet people outside. We don't spend time with them. We don't go looking for them. Yes, Jesus said we were to be in the world, but not of the world. And if we want to understand that, we have to look at Jesus, where he could be found, with whom he could be found. Look at his life, to seek and to save whatever is lost. That's our mission if we follow him. It's like his. That's what he said to Peter, wasn't he? He said, Peter, you've got a change of life. You're going to go out finding people, fishers of men. We can be so wrapped up in the cozy blanket of our church life that we don't meet those who need us and who need a doctor. We need to go out, outside, as Jesus did. We need to meet, we need to seek, and we need to see, as Jesus said, as the Queen was said to do, to make people the focus of our attention. Not simply as potential converts, but seeing them with the love of God in their lostness to bring healing. Well, that was one effect that this had on me. But thank God there was another effect. And it was a predominant effect. And it was wonder. Because it was saying to myself, hallelujah, what a Savior. A Savior who has time for the weak and the foolish, the betrayers, the outsiders, the traitors, the failures, who sees me exactly as I am and still loves me. Who knows me exactly as I am, and still I can say that he loved me and gave himself for me. If we love him, if we follow him, we've got to be able to see, to really look, to see those in need of soul doctoring, wherever we find them, wherever God puts them. May we get that quality that apparently the Queen had with all the myriads of people around her, to make people feel that they were being seen. Because as we see them with the eyes of grace, we see them with the eyes of Jesus, and we are his eyes on his world. May God help us in Jesus. Amen.